Today's session is going to be on counter canter. And to help me with my counter canter demonstration, we have my dear friend, Megan Maurice, and we have Lace here, who's going to be our demonstration horse. Now, let me tell you a little bit about counter canter. We introduced counter canter at first level, just very gentle arc of counter canter. And I don't want you to be concerned that it's a difficult, complicated exercise. Counter canter is an obedience exercise, it's a balance exercise, and when the horse is straight, it also becomes a little bit of a collecting exercise because it asks the horse to bend the joints of the hind legs and sit down behind. And so the horse takes more weight on the hind legs and is a little bit lighter and freer in front. But it's a pretty simple exercise except for one thing, the psychological aspect of both the horse and the rider. For the horse, up until this point of time in her education, she's been taught that she's doing the correct thing when she canters with the inside front leg as the leading leg. And then suddenly we change that and the outside front leg is the leading leg. So sometimes the horse thinks that they're being disobedient and they want to switch leads. And that's why, as with everything else in training, we introduce the counter canter very, very gradually, and Megan and I will show you the patterns, how gradually you can introduce it so we can get rid of the psychological barrier for the horse that it's a difficult thing, because really it isn't. Because what counter canter is simply a canter bound. And that's the psychological challenge for the rider, because the rider thinks, oh, I'm doing a complicated exercise, I'm doing a counter canter. And it's simply a canter bound. So the rhythm and the tempo and the straightness through the horse's body and the air time during the period of suspension during counter canter should just be identical to the feeling in true canter. So that's one thing. And one thing I say to riders to help them with this psychological block is that if you were tracking to the right on left lead counter canter and you're close to the fence, one way to get rid of the psychological block is to pretend that there isn't even any fence there and that you're on left lead and you could turn to the left and canter right out of the arena. So that's a good way to not feel claustrophobic by the rail and that you're on the wrong lead, is what counter canter can feel like. And like I said, since counter canter is simply true canter going in the other direction, the aids for counter canter are identical to the aids for true canter. So for example, if Megan were tracking to the right and she was on left lead counter canter, her weight would be on her left seat bone, her left leg would be on the girth. She would signal the strike off for left lead counter canter by bringing her right leg behind the girth. She would ask Lace for a little bit of flexion at the pole to the inside by turning the key in the lock, but knowing that horses are more flexible in the neck than in the rest of the body, should have a steady and firm supporting outside rein. So the aids for counter canter are exactly the same as they are for true canter. So we're going to demonstrate. I'm going to give Megan a little time to warm up here now, but then I'm going to demonstrate how to introduce counter canter very, very gradually so that both the horse and the rider get over any possible psychological blocks. So we're going to take a little break now, give her a chance to warm up, and then we'll be back shortly. Okay, so now in order to be systematic, we're going to start with the simplest counter canter exercise there is. And what Megan and Lace are going to do is just start a canter from the long side, from the first letter, and only come about 1 meter off the track. And what Megan is thinking about is, does everything stay the same? The rhythm, the tempo, the balance, the period of suspension. That was beautiful. Very nice. That's very easy. And in that exercise, the horse only does a couple of strides of counter canter, the strides where she's just across from B or E. Come out a little further this time. When you do this, you want to be sure you do this shallow loop symmetrically. She's coming almost to the quarter line now. And the height of the loop is across from either E or B. That's why it's important to ride in a dressage arena, because then you know if the horse is doing equal effort with both hind legs. Now come out to the center line, and I want you to watch Megan's elbows, how elastic they are. It's like her arm is an extension of the rein, and she rows the boat. And this allows the horse to come up with the nose on the third beat of the canter rather than having the nose pulled in on the third beat of the canter. If she pulled the horse's nose in, she would put the horse on the forehand. Let's just do that once more to the center line. Oh, that's okay, that's fine. Beautiful elastic elbows. One more time to the center line. Good, good, good. Lovely elbows. You want to think that your arm is an extension of the rein, and the reins are like two solid sticks, and you're pushing the horse's nose out, 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 out on the third beat of the canter. Very beautiful. Just circle around me. That's beautiful. And you see nothing changed. The canter looked exactly the same, and we just sort of snuck those few counter canter strides up on the horse. Now I want to show you some of the common mistakes that riders make. You might have noticed that Megan just kept a little flexion at the pole, a +1 flexion to the inside during the counter canter. But oftentimes, because riders are afraid that their horses are going to break or switch leads, they ride in distress and they overbend the horse's neck to the inside. And so if you could do that on the shallow loops, do it wrong on the next two shallow loops where you overbend the neck to the right and her shoulder pops left. Now, if you ride it like this, the horse isn't straight. Her axis isn't straight. Good, Megan, that's really awful. That's excellent. And notice the haunches drift to the right as well. And the thing about that is, it might seem like your horse is being obedient because the horse is staying on the same lead, but as far as the counter canter becoming a collecting exercise, you see her neck is too bent to the right, the shoulders are left, the haunches are right. Because the horse is not straight, which is the 5th ingredient in the training scale, then the horse falls on the forehand. So the horse can't reach the 6th ingredient, which is collection. So Megan's going to do a correction for this common mistake by riding in left flexion even though she's on right lead. But she has to keep the rest of her aids in right canter, otherwise the horse might think flying change. Good, do that again. So she keeps her weight on her right seat bone, her inner leg on the girth, her outer leg behind the girth, but she's going to flex the horse to the left to position her in, good, perfect, in a -1 flexion. And you can see how that puts the horse's shoulders directly in front of the horse's hips. Then once you get that feeling, you can go back, you can circle around me now. Once you get that feeling of the horse's shoulders being directly in front of your hips and the horse's hips, then you can go back to riding the horse with correct flexion but keeping the shoulders in the same spot. Now here's another common mistake that we see riders make, and if you could do this on two long sides so we could see it going away and coming toward, is they arc off the rail nicely, but they don't ride on a straight line back to the track. Just circle around, doesn't matter. Quiet riding, good? That's right, just quiet riding. That was a long canter for a young horse, so that was okay, good, good. So you're going to arc out like you've been doing, but then sort of drift back to F, drift back to the track, so the horse falls through your outside aids. The horse is falling through the left rein and leg, rather than riding on a straight line. Yeah, that's right. That's not what you want to do, people. Try that once more. That's a nice frame. You see, we want to ride the horse, excuse me, up in the bridle knot, down on the bit. Good. So she's cantering out nicely, but then she falls back to the rail. That's correct. That's correct. Falling sideways. Good. We don't want to do that. Okay, Megan, you can just take a little break to the walk for a second. Okay, so that's another thing. If you're not thinking about riding accurately, you lose the benefits of the counter canter if you let your horse just drift back to the rail like that. So you want to think you ride out on a single track, you keep the same quality of canter on the height of the shallow loop, and then you ride back to the corner letter on a single track. You don't let the horse drift with the body. Okay, now you can see that those exercises are progressively more difficult for the horse. There are more counter canter steps involved, but we do it very, very gradually so the horse doesn't even realize it's happening. The first loop, she's only 1 meter off the rail. The next loop, she came to the quarter line, and the next loop, she came almost to the center line. It would follow, once the horse can do that easily, that you could add further complications, for example, by going across the diagonal and staying on the counter canter through the entire short side. Or you could do a serpentine of 3 loops, staying on the same lead the entire time. So the first and the third loop would be in true canter, and the middle loop would be in counter canter. And you want to feel that the quality of the canter stays exactly the same on that middle loop. But as you progress through these exercises, and they are progressively more difficult for the horse, if you reach a point where your horse tells you through resistance, through breaking to the trot, through switching leads, through doing a disunited canter, which means they're cantering on one lead in front and the other lead behind, the horse is talking to you and you need to listen. And the horse is probably saying, wait a minute, I don't have the balance and strength just yet to cope with this degree of difficulty of the exercise. So just back off to the next most simplest counter canter exercise and just plateau off at that level for a while until the horse develops the strength and the confidence in the movement, and then you can try one that's progressively a little more harder, a little more difficult. With that in mind, as far as being a little more difficult, as I said, counter canter is a psychological thing for the horse and for the rider, because the horse has always been taught to canter with the inside leg as the leading leg when they're in true canter. And it's a little bit psychological for the rider to try to pick up the counter canter lead as well. It's psychological for the rider when the rail is on the outside, because we feel claustrophobic. We feel a little bit bound by the rail. So as I said earlier, one thing is to imagine that the wall isn't even here, and that whatever lead you're picking up, you could turn as if you were cantering out of the arena. You weren't bound by the wall. But another thing we can do to help is cut across the arena there, Megan, and then track to the left, and stay 1 or 2 meters away from the rail. She's going to pick up the counter canter lead off the track. You might have to wait till you're on the next long side. But rather than trying to pick up the counter canter directly on the rail, you always want to set your horse up for success. So if you start this exercise 1 meter or 2 meters off the rail and pretend you're going to circle out of the arena, that the walls weren't really here, it becomes psychologically easier for both you and your horse. So stay a little bit off the rail. Think right shoulder 4 or right first position, so she's straight through the canter depart, and see if she'll pick up the right lead counter canter for you. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Good, tell her good girl, that was super. And just canter through the short side. That's nice frame, beautiful. Quietly walking, and try that again. That was beautiful. Good, well done you. So remember, we always want to be in a little bit of first position. That's right, first position through the canter depart, so the horse has to load the right hind leg in this case. Good, tell her good girl, and just stay in counter canter. So you see, if you started a little bit off the rail and imagine you're going to turn to the right and canter out of the arena, very nice, Megan. Then it becomes less of a psychological thing for the horse. Very good. And then you can collect her a little and walk. Okay, and pet her, and that's great for her. Thank you so much.